I'll introduce our first speaker, who's Dr. Pat Olson. Pat is the Executive Director of Scientific Affairs here at CIRM, and the topic of her talk is upcoming RFAs. Where does your project fit? Pat?
Thank you. What I'd like to do first is talk a little bit about our funding strategy, the basis for our funding strategy, the RFAs that help us realize our funding strategy, and then I'll focus on upcoming RFAs and talk a little bit about them so you can perhaps get some idea of where you might fit in the context of that. The basis for our RFA funding strategy is our mission, and I would just like to remind you about certain key elements of it. So it's to support and advance stem cell research in regenerative medicine under the highest ethical and medical standards for the discovery and development of cures and therapies, diagnostics and research technologies to relieve human suffering from chronic disease and injury. And that really is the basis for how we think about for the funding strategy that we have developed. In particular, over the first couple of years of our funding, what we wanted to do was to put in place the physical and intellectual infrastructure. So what we did was we funded shared labs and research facilities to essentially provide space for the multidisciplinary conduct of stem cell research. We also invested heavily into personnel. So we invested in training programs, and at all levels, at the undergraduate level, at the graduate level, at the clinical fellow level. Furthermore, we also invested in new faculty, in those faculty who are in the early stages of their careers and really need to develop their research program so that they're competitive going forward in funding. So we've invested substantial money in training both scientists and physician scientists in new faculty. We've also invested in certain specialized programs, and we will continue to do so in response to what we perceive as the needs of the field, what we hear are the needs of the field. And those are things like the tools and technologies, the transplantation immunology. These are research questions that we think are important to be solved or to have work done in order to move the field forward broadly as a whole. But one of the underlying elements of our funding strategy is what I'll call our pipeline strategy. And that is that we need to fund research at all the necessary stages to basically realize our mission of being able to provide therapies to persons with disease and injury. So we want to fund basic biology so that there may be some discoveries that may have utility, that may be able to brought forward into early translational research. Those activities may get so far that you can actually generate something that's worth taking into people, a development candidate, which could then move into disease team funding and then ultimately into clinical studies. This pipeline strategy is really a critical element of our funding. So I want to just talk very briefly about some of the core elements of that pipeline strategy. And the one is a basic biology program. We offer all of these programs on roughly a 12 to 18 month timeline every 12 to 18 months. So these are repeating RFAs. Basic biology really does target fundamental research on stem cells. It's things like mechanisms of pluripotency, of differentiation. Translational research is really those activities that have what I'll call a product-based focused. I mean, are they something that maybe will end up going into the clinic? And we have early translational, and in our current early translational program has a goal of leading to, that is, conducting some of the activities that could determine feasibility for a development candidate or actually result in a development candidate. Our disease teams are directed research including IND-enabling preclinical studies, clinical trials, and supporting non-clinical activities. These translational programs are typically multidisciplinary team in nature. They include active management. CIRM works with the teams themselves. They are goal and milestone driven, and there are go, no-go decisions associated with them. So in this way, we hope to be able to move some of our programs forward into the clinic and through clinical trials for the benefit of patients. I just have put this slide here. I don't want you to read it, but it's to indicate one very important point. This area, preclinical development, phase 1 development, early clinical research, I'll call it, is an area that's typically called by some venture capitalists and by many funders as the valley of death. It is very difficult to get funds that cover all the activities that take place, especially in the set of activities that are required by the regulators for going into humans. CIRM funds this. CIRM doesn't just fund the preclinical research studies. CIRM will fund the making of a GMP bank. CIRM will fund the IND-enabling toxicology studies. So this is one unique aspect of our program and what we think really helps to bring therapies forward into for testing in people. Now I'd like to shift a little bit and talk about the upcoming RFAs that actually are going to all be issued this year. Actually, there's the early translational research, and I've talked a little bit about this. So these opportunities span the entire, as you can see, funding pipeline. Early translational research is actually an active RFA. In point of fact, pre-applications are due in just a couple of weeks. Tools and technologies will be issued within a month or two. There's a targeted clinical research program which is coming up probably in about 2 months. There is a fundamental biology program that will be released later in this summer. And there is a secondary disease team research program. I would just bring to your attention that this particular program, in contrast to the first disease team research program, will require a development candidate. In other words, will require that you are ready to initiate those activities to actually get a regulatory approval to move into testing in patients. I've summarized here, just provided a bit of timeline. As I've already, the dotted line shows approximately where we are right now. As you can see, I think we have a very full program coming up over the upcoming year, and I hope with something for everyone. So with that, I hand it over to the next speaker. Thank you.